Behind me is Bouverie Street, thought to be one of the oldest, longest tenements still standing in Europe, and it's due for demolition this month. This building has over 150 years of history. This is a short film about the town, the building, and what the people think about Bouverie Street being demolished. The population of Port Glasgow had doubled, and the housing was very poor, sometimes up to 3 families living in the one flat with no running water and no sanitation. The owners of the mill at the time, the Birkmyre family, decided they would build housing for the mill workers only, and this was the beginning of Bouverie Street. The first build was Bouverie Terrace, and it was built in 1864. It had 3 tenements and a school on the end, which was later turned into flats with housing above. As the business grew, so did the need for more housing, and a large tenement was then constructed. But it was built in 2 halves. The first half was constructed in 1878, and from numbers 28 to 38 weren't constructed till nearly 20 years later in 1897. If you look at the building between 26 and 28, you can still see the join in the building. As the mill continued to expand and get bigger, so did the need for more housing for the workers. So Firth View was then constructed in 1910. It was built at the top of Bouverie Street, but it was never called Bouverie Street. It was always known as Firth View. It had 5 tenements with shops below. The final build in the street was constructed in 1932 and consisted of 3 tenements, numbers 13 to 17. In this 1932 aerial picture, you can clearly see all the tenements as they were in the street and the vast area that was the Gourock Rope Works.
I lived in 20 Bouverie Street, which we called the Wide Pen, and it was a top floor flat, which there were 5 neighbours stayed in the landing.
What were the facilities like in your flat?
The flat in 20 was just 1 room, which we called a single end, which entailed a set-in bed, like for the bedroom, and a small scullery off for the kitchen. The toilet on the landing was shared with 19 people, which they lived over 5 flats.
When Bouverie was renovated and you moved to number 28, what was the flat like?
It was heaven. It was just heaven, because it was a much bigger house. We had the separate kitchen and the bathroom inside.
When did you leave Bouverie and why?
I left Bouverie in 2007. The reason I left Bouverie was we knew in the future Bouverie was going to be demolished, so we started looking for another house then before they would come and say we had to go.
So what do you think now about Bouverie being demolished?
It's devastating. I really think it's terrible what they're doing to this building. It's really terrible.
With this building steeped in history, it was time RiverClyde Homes told me why they were going to demolish it.
We've been involved with Bouverie since 2007, since the stock transfer. All what was formerly the Inverclyde Council tenants' houses came across to ourselves in that transfer, and we were then responsible for those properties.
How would you describe the housing in the area of Bouverie?
Bouverie Street itself is the longest standing tenement property in Scotland, but it's also one of the social housing areas for ourselves and regeneration areas. A feasibility study carried out to look at whether we could remodel the properties. As you know, quite a lot of the properties there's 3 flats a landing. Demand wasn't great, so we were looking at whether we could remodel them into bigger flats and a better layout. So that was carried out along with a public consultation with the residents and the owners. There was quite a few owners still lived in those properties. Once that was all pulled together, it was then evaluated. The costs were looked at, and at that point it was decided that we couldn't take it any further. The costs outweighed the gains out of the project.
I've never been annoyed where I've had to protest about it, but it should have been carefully thought out. But the truth of the matter was, when Inverclyde Council owned them, they were pretty well run down. They were all transferred free of cost to RiverClyde Homes, and RiverClyde Homes had just taken a leaf out of the book and said these will never be anything again. Dildon is prominent when you come into Port Glasgow, and I think they'd rather be looking at a nice landscape than the rear of the ugly property. I think regeneration in this century means the clearances. You knock it down, you build fresh, or you knock it down and you don't build. The demolition, it'll take a few years to materialise just what have we done here? Have we moved forward? Or have we learned anything from it? I'm sure we'll be talking about the Bouverie for many a year. And obviously the stories will be more romantic when the building's gone, I'm sure.
The cones are out, the fences are up. The men are now here. The demolition has now begun, and Bouverie will soon be no more.